Mansfield, Texas, a sprawling bedroom community nestled between Dallas and Fort Worth. On the night of December 3rd, 1995, 16-year-old Adrianne Jones and her mother Linda had just returned home from working out at their health club when Adrianne received a phone call at around 10:30 p.m.
She walked down the hallway and she came back, and I said, "You get that phone put down and you get to bed, little girl." And then after that I went to bed. And she'd said it was David from cross country, and he's upset.
Adrianne's mother had no idea who David was and assumed he was just one of her daughter's many high school friends. The next morning, Linda's son, Justin, woke her before leaving for school.
Justin knocked on my door and said, "Well, Mom, where's Adrianne?" I said, "What do you mean? She's at school." She says, "Well, her stuff's still here." And so that was around 7. So I went in and checked, and her things were still there. And I said, "What's going on?"
Linda knew her daughter would sometimes sneak out her bedroom window at night to meet friends, but Adrianne always returned before morning. Linda called Mansfield High, where her daughter was a sophomore. The school reported that Adrianne wasn't in class. Linda immediately reported Adrianne missing and gave her photograph to the Mansfield police.
And at noon, I knew something was really, really, really wrong. And I called my husband up and I said, "Adrianne's not here. We can't find her anywhere. She's not at school. She's not at her friends." We called everybody in her address book looking for them. The Davids especially. I was looking at every David in her address book.
Earlier that morning, a farmer had discovered the body of a teenage girl in a field near Joe Pool Lake, a popular recreation area about 10 miles from Mansfield. The girl was wearing a sweatshirt, running shorts, and no shoes. She had been bludgeoned and shot twice in the head. Police from the neighboring town of Grand Prairie had jurisdiction over the area where the body was found. Detectives collected shell casings from the scene and determined that the girl had been shot with a 9mm pistol. The Tarrant County medical examiner saw no signs of sexual abuse and concluded that the teenager had died around 1 o'clock that morning. Early that evening, Grand Prairie detectives informed the Jones family that the body they had found was Adrianne's.
My husband had to go with the detectives and identify her body. And I called all my family, and I can still hear their voices saying, "No, you're wrong." And it was the truth. She had been shot and murdered by somebody. No one could figure out why.
Detectives interviewed several students at Mansfield High School, including a senior named David Graham, who, like Adrianne, was on the cross-country track team. Graham was an honor student, active in the ROTC and Civil Air Patrol. He was expecting to hear any day about his appointment as a cadet at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Graham told police he hadn't spoken to Adrianne lately, but offered to help in any way he could. He gave detectives no indication of having any type of relationship with her. The case had detectives baffled. Adrianne was not a troublemaker or an outcast. She was an attractive, popular girl, a straight-A student who dreamed of studying behavioral sciences at Texas A&M University. She worked at a fast food restaurant after school, played soccer, and was on the track team. She had no enemies whom her family or friends could identify. It seemed like a random and senseless crime.
I mean, here she is, this beautiful young girl, and she's found in this really wackety place out in nowhere land, and she's been shot in the face and bludgeoned in the back of her head, and you don't know why. What did this young 16-year-old little girl know or do that caused you to hate her that much?
11 days after Adrianne Jones was murdered, police in Grand Prairie, Texas, had a suspect in custody, a 17-year-old classmate named Brian McMillan. Although they had no real evidence against him, police held Brian for 3 weeks, pressuring him to confess to the murder. He never did, and after passing a polygraph test, he was released. His family later sued the city of Grand Prairie and the police and settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. For the next 9 months, detectives turned up no new leads. Their big break would occur far from Texas, at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. For 9 long months, detectives in Grand Prairie, Texas, focused on little else but solving the murder of 16-year-old Adrianne Jones. They followed up on dozens of leads, but were getting nowhere.
And my husband totally believed they would never, ever, ever find the killers, let alone go to trial. And I said, you know, they're going to find them. And then our prayer came true. They bragged.
In late August 1996, Grand Prairie Police received a tip from authorities at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. An 18-year-old midshipman named Diane Zamora had reportedly confided to her roommates that she and her fiancé had killed a girl in their home state of Texas. The dead girl's name was Adrianne Jones. Zamora's fiancé was an Air Force Academy cadet named David Graham. The story that would soon emerge was of an obsessed couple so devoted to each other that they had sworn not to let anything come between them, and of the girl who somehow became the target of their buried resentments. Both David Graham and Diane Zamora were overachievers who dreamed of careers in the military. They had started dating during their senior year in high school. David attended Mansfield, while Diane was a student at nearby Crowley High. In a rare interview with American Justice, David talked about his relationship with Diane.
I'd known Diane in the Civil Air Patrol for about 3 years before we started going out. And I'd always known her to be a real bubbly, spontaneous girl, and I knew she was very smart, that she made straight A's in school, and she was real determined to get what she wanted.
In the spring of 1996, David received an appointment to the Air Force Academy in Colorado, where he would train to be a pilot. Around the same time, Diane, whose dream was to become an astronaut, was accepted to the Naval Academy. The only thing more important than their military careers was their intense devotion to each other. The teenagers were engaged and planned to marry 4 years later in the summer of the year 2000.
I knew that the relationship we had was too serious for that time in our life, and I tried to slow it down, but there was nothing I could do. I was infatuated with her, and she was obsessed with me.
The young couple were bound by more than the promise of marriage. They shared a horrible secret they had sworn to carry to their graves. A secret that Diane's roommates at the academy had reported to naval authorities. This was the break Grand Prairie Police had been waiting for. Investigators flew immediately to Annapolis. They interviewed 3 of Diane's classmates. All confirmed that she had told them about the murder. Police then questioned Diane.
As I spoke to her, told her why we were there and who we were, I got no reaction whatsoever. I got what is sometimes referred to as the 1,000-mile stare. She just kind of looked through us.
Diane insisted she had made up the stories and was innocent. Investigators returned to Texas, determined to gather enough evidence to arrest Zamora and Graham as quickly as possible. The Naval Academy requested that Diane take a leave due to her alleged crime. On August 31st, she flew to Colorado Springs to see David.
She told me that she had told her roommate stuff. She had given them several different versions, but when the police came, she said she denied everything. So I thought, well, if the police come and talk to me, I'll just tell them I don't know anything about it.
On September 4th, investigators questioned David at the Air Force Academy. He denied any involvement in Adrianne Jones's murder. He even agreed to take a polygraph exam. He failed. After 2 days of interrogation, and without a lawyer present, 18-year-old David was ready to give a written statement. He now claims police pressured him into making a confession.
It came to a point where the detectives were threatening, telling me that it didn't matter what I said, I was going to get the death penalty, and Diane was going to get the death penalty too. And one of the detectives said, "David, just write us a story, tell us something, and we'll make sure they go easy on you." So I said, "Okay, here, I'll write you something."
David typed his own statement. He wrote in chilling detail about a cold-blooded, calculated murder carried out by two teenagers, consumed by guilt, jealousy, and passion. David wrote that in December 1995, he had confessed to Diane that he and teammate Adrianne Jones had a one-time sexual encounter after a track meet in Lubbock the previous month. "The tryst was meaningless and painful," he wrote, "because I was letting down the one person I swore to be faithful to." Diane was devastated by his betrayal and requested that David do the unthinkable. "The only thing that could satisfy her womanly vengeance," wrote David, "was the life of the one that had for an instant taken her place." Guilty and ashamed, David agreed to kill Adrianne Jones to purify their love. On December 3rd, 1995, he called Adrianne and arranged to meet her in front of her house around 1 a.m. He packed a bag with exercise weights and a gun. The plan, he wrote, was to break her young neck and sink her body to the bottom of the lake. Driving Diane's Mazda protege, David brought Adrianne to a deserted field. Diane was hiding in the trunk. Once parked, Diane climbed through to the back seat, surprising Adrianne. Then both David and Diane attacked her, while she fought for her life. According to David, Diane grabbed a weight from the floor. "We realized that it was either her or us," David said in his confession, "and Diane struck her in the back of the head while I held her." Adrianne managed to climb out the window and staggered a few feet before collapsing into a barbed wire fence. "I knew I couldn't leave the key witness to our crime alive," David wrote. "I just pointed and shot." The first words David and Diane said to each other were, "I love you," followed by Diane's comment, "We shouldn't have done that, David." He ended his confession by saying, "What happened was over. Adrianne was gone, I was responsible, and it wasn't going away." Graham signed all 4.5 pages.
It was all so surreal. I hadn't really internalized it yet. And I guess after being awake for so many hours, you know, what I said to the police I guess it didn't see how any of that could affect my life.
He later told police that the gun and the weights were in the attic of his parents' house in Mansfield. Police immediately searched the house and found them, hidden in the insulation. David was arrested for murder and awaited extradition to Texas. Back in Grand Prairie, police had all the evidence they needed. At 1:20 a.m. on the same night David was confessing to detectives in Colorado, Diane Zamora was arrested at her grandparents' home in Fort Worth.
Diane was very obviously surprised. She wasn't asking any questions. She wasn't making any denials. You know, she wasn't, no outburst of, "Why are you arresting me?" She's very quiet.
After booking, Diane spent the night alone in the Grand Prairie jail. The next day at her arraignment, she was charged with murder and held on $250,000 bail. By this time, police had received a fax of David's confession from Colorado Springs.
His initials were shown to her, his waiver of rights, and then, you know, he has put it on paper. Do you want to? He's told his side. Do you want to tell your side? And she did.
Without an attorney present, Diane recited to Detective Patton virtually the same grim story of how she and David had killed Adrianne Jones. She recalled the day David confessed his alleged infidelity. "I kept ramming my head into the floor, trying to crack my skull," she said. "I screamed at him, 'Kill her, kill her.'"
She felt like she had been scorned that he had had a sexual relationship of some kind with another woman. And she had this tough mentality of, I'm going to get even.
Diane not only admitted to hitting Adrianne in the head with the exercise weight, but she also confessed that she ordered David to shoot her. He was really panicky and he wanted to take off, Diane wrote. But he went back to where she was because I told him to. He shot her twice in the head.
She didn't have time to fabricate or embellish or invent a story that she thought might sound similar to David's. She was spontaneous. She was going so fast, there were times when I had to slow her down.
With the matching confessions in hand, the state was ready to prosecute the couple who had claimed to kill in the name of love. Texas authorities later added kidnapping to the murder charges against David Graham and Diane Zamora, making it a capital crime punishable by death. But the parents of victim Adrianne Jones did not want prosecutors to pursue the death penalty, saying they had no desire to see two more young people die. The prosecution agreed. The two lovers would soon be in court. While they had promised each other not to let anything come between them, it was a pledge Diane would not keep. In September 1996, the national media latched onto the story of a love triangle involving two promising young military recruits and a beautiful teenage rifle. Air Force cadet David Graham and his fiancée Diane Zamora, a naval midshipman, had confessed to the murder of 16-year-old Adrianne Jones.
These were the atypical youthful criminals. I mean, that was the story here. The perfect male, the perfect female, both going to military academies, both in the upper like 5 or 6% of their class, both attractive.
Even Hollywood was intrigued. In February 1997, a year before either Graham or Zamora went on trial, a movie about the crime aired on network television. It was based on David's confession, which had been leaked to the press.
Diane's beautiful eyes have always played the strings of my heart effortlessly. I couldn't imagine life without her.
She'll have to suffer the consequences. She will have to die.
Since their arrests 1 year earlier, Diane and David were being housed in separate cells in the Tarrant County Jail, where they had faithfully written each other love letters. David wrote to Diane, "I miss you like I miss ice cream. You are both rich and creamy, sweet and ice cold, milky and tasty, and bad for you." In a letter to David, Diane wrote, "When will my love come find me? When will I get to walk out of these bars for good? I just wish I had a remote control for time. That would rock." In an effort to keep the proceedings fair and uncomplicated, Judge Joe Drago decided to try the cases separately. Under Texas law, both defendants could be tried as adults since they were over 17 at the time of the murder. In January 1998, Diane Zamora's trial began in Fort Worth. Despite the publicity surrounding the case, the judge allowed the trial to be televised and chose not to sequester the jury.
One of the TV stations carried the whole thing the whole time, just like the O.J. Simpson trial. It was bizarre. This can't really be happening. This does not happen to people last name Jones that live in a little town, Mansfield, Texas.
Diane's confession was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, but the state also called a stream of witnesses whose stories were all remarkably similar.
Our strategy in Zamora was to make her convict herself. She had enough admissions to non-law enforcement people her own age, her own roommates, that had absolutely no issue of unreliability.
Zamora's defense was that while she was at the scene of the crime, she did not participate in the killing. She claimed she was bullied into confessing to murder by an abusive boyfriend and overzealous detectives. On February 2nd, prosecutor Mike Parrish started out strong with his key witness, Diane's best friend, Christina Mason. She told the jury that the motive for the murder was David Graham's sexual fling with Adrianne Jones.
She said this is a girl he had sex with, and that they had planned her murder.
Okay, and how had they planned her murder?
At first, they were planning to snap her neck and drop the body in the lake, but it didn't go as planned.
It was obvious to everybody in that courtroom that Christina Mason knew what she was talking about. She just knew too much and knew too much too well to really have made this up.
The prosecution also called David's best friend, John Green. He testified that while he didn't know at the time what David and Diane had done, the couple had come to his house on the night of the murder.
After they came out of the bathroom, David was just holding Diane, and she's kind of whimpering and stuff. And they just laid down on my floor and went to sleep for a while.
The prosecution called witness after witness, whose testimony supported Diane's own admission. Former midshipman Jay Guild, a classmate of Zamora's, described the bizarre promise Diane told him she had made to David.
She had told me one time that she had promised David that if she had ever cheated on him, that she would do the same thing for him that they had already done.
She would kill the person that she cheated with?
Yes.
With every witness's testimony, the state wove an extraordinary tale of teenage obsession and jealousy. Some of the most compelling testimony came from Diane's former roommate at the Naval Academy, Jennifer McKierney.
She said that everyone knew that the girl was a tramp and a slut, and that she deserved to die.
The only sign of remorse came when McKierney recalled Diane talking about Adrianne's funeral.
She said that she and David went to the funeral, and that when she went to the funeral, she saw the parents, and she saw how sad they were, and it made her feel very bad. She felt sorry for the parents.
Along with Diane's confession, the prosecution showed the jury DNA tests identifying the blood in Diane's car as Adrianne's. The gun and exercise weights, which were found in David's attic, and Diane's day planner.
She had certain dates circled, important dates, birthdays, graduation days, and on December the 4th, there was a circle and a little arrow drawn down, and it had Adrianne, 1:38 a.m.
She was very particular on details, by her date book, by writing things down. And why would you write down something that you did if you didn't do it? Diane's confession was everything she said it was.
Diane's defense attorney, John Linebarger, tried to argue that Diane's confession was given under duress and that she had lied to police to protect her violent, manipulative boyfriend, David Graham. Using letters and emails David had written to Diane, the defense painted Graham as a domineering young man.
And did she likewise respond to him as tiger and her as kitten?
And her role as kitten, and he as being a tiger, yes, sir.
Does that also have an element to you of dominion and control, Doctor?
But the obvious difference in size, strength, and prowess, yes, sir.
It never reached the point, as it was described in her trial, that I would abuse, hit her, molest her, anything like that. It was all, for me, it was all just kind of mind games with her. And it was on her part too, although she did hit me a little, it was nothing ever serious. Twice her size.
Knowing how strong the state's case was, the defense made a last-ditch effort to win over the jury by putting Diane Zamora on the stand.
This jury wanted to hear from her, and Diane had a story to tell that was honest and truthful.
Up in the air like this. To have a chance with this many admissions that she had already made, to have any chance at all, she had to get up there and convince that jury of something.
While Diane admitted that she was there the night Adrianne Jones died, she contradicted her own sworn statement when she testified that David alone killed her. She claimed she only recalled hearing gunshots, then David bringing Adrianne's body to the car.
He said, look what you made me do.
Did you make him do that, Diane?
No. I asked him to let me meet her.
Had you ever asked him to kill Adrianne Jones for you?
No.
There was no emotion in her crying, and it came across as if she had been coached by her attorneys or by somebody that when they start asking you these questions, you need to start crying.
Take that in your right hand.
When cross-examined by the prosecution, Diane's demeanor suddenly changed.
Christina Mason is a liar.
Oh, we found somebody. Well, is Jay Gill a liar?
No, sir. I believe Jay Guild and Jennifer McCurney misinterpreted a lot, and there are reasons I said what I said, but they're not liars. Christina Mason is a liar, though.
She was very cocky, very arrogant. Her answers were short to the point and very stern, as if you're not going to get me on this.
She was trying unsuccessfully to portray herself as one type of person, trying to shift responsibility to David. And it was obvious to me that it was a bogus attempt to try a defense strategy that she didn't have the personality to pull off.
The jury agreed. On February 17th, after deliberating for 6 hours, they reached a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant Diane Michelle Zamora guilty of the offense of capital murder as alleged in the indictment. Signed, Monty Winsett. Signed.
The judge sentenced Diane to life in prison, as required by Texas law. Before even being considered for parole, she is required to serve a minimum of 40 years. For the family of Adrianne Jones, justice had prevailed, but it didn't lessen their pain.
She meant a lot to me. And when she died, something was ripped out of my heart that will never be replaced.
We can only hope that if David Graham respects his military code of honor, he will step forward and accept responsibility.
As Diane Zamora was heading off to prison near Gatesville, Texas, a new judge was appointed for David Graham's trial. Faced with the nearly impossible task of finding a jury that hadn't heard about the case, Judge Don Leonard moved David's trial south to New Braunfels, Texas, near San Antonio. There, David would follow Diane's lead and turn on his lover to save himself. In July 1998, former Air Force cadet David Graham went on trial for capital murder in New Braunfels, Texas, near San Antonio. The 20-year-old had watched his fiancée, Diane Zamora, betray him at her trial 5 months earlier and blame him alone for the murder of Adrianne Jones. After her trial, Graham understandably broke off the engagement. Now that it was his turn to face the murder charge, he was prepared to do Diane one better.
When it came down to my defense, I wasn't going to let that, crazy infatuation, obsessed relationship stop me from telling the truth and from getting myself off after what she had said about me.
Not only would Graham try to claim that Diane was solely responsible for the murder, his argument would be that he wasn't even at the scene of the crime.
He was not there when that Jones child was killed. And there's no physical evidence that puts him there. What puts David there is his statement, Zamora's statement, and Zamora's statements to other people.
What parts of the statement are inaccurate?
From the beginning, Graham's attorney, Dan Cogdell, courted the media, particularly when it came to the state's most incriminating evidence, David's highly damaging confession.
To me, that statement is a product of 30 hours of interrogation, of false promises being made to him, of assurances to him that he doesn't need a lawyer and a lawyer will only confuse things.
The defense theory was that a lovesick David only agreed to confess in order to protect the woman he loved.
He vowed to Diane that night that if they were ever caught, he would confess along with her. He would admit to doing a crime that he didn't do.
Cogdell was gambling that he could poke enough holes in Graham's own confession that the jury would come to believe that Graham had made the whole thing up.
Diane Zamora did kill Adrianne Jones. David Graham did not. David Graham was not there.
In his interview with American Justice, David wasn't willing to say where he was at the time of the murder, and he has never presented any kind of clear alibi.
As Cogdell asserted at my trial, I wasn't there the night of the crime. Only Diane Zamora was. And all my attorney will allow me to say is that sometime between the crime and when we got to Jay Green's house, she rendezvoused with me and told me what she had done and asked me to help her.
In the courtroom, prosecutor Mike Parrish wasn't fazed by the defense's claims. He rehashed the events of the night of Adrianne Jones's murder, all based on David's sworn statement.
As he says in his voluntary statement, I knew at that moment I couldn't leave the key witness to our crime alive, and he takes his gun. Diane Zamora, at the same time, is saying she's not dead. Shooter, killer, shooter. David Graham does exactly that. His confession completely supported all of the physical evidence at the scene. The position of Adrianne's body, the blood on the top strand of the barbed wire fence, her falling down as she gets into the barbed wire.
To many observers, David came across as being cold and egotistical, much like Diane at her trial.
His demeanor in the courtroom was kind of cocky and a little bit arrogant. His smile is just sort of a smile, but more of a smirk. He pretty much had that look the entire trial.
Parrish called many of the same witnesses as were in Diane's trial, but this time, his key piece of evidence was the murder weapon. The prosecution explained to the jury how David had led police to the 9mm Makarov handgun, and that it matched the bullets and shell casings found at the crime scene. In David's interview for this program, he insisted he was only hiding the gun to protect his lover.
I put the gun in my attic a couple of days afterwards because Diane was, I don't know if she was attached to it. She thought it was some kind of sign of her devotion to me, if it was just some kind of symbol of what she would do. I don't know, but she wouldn't let me get rid of it.
But the real surprise of the trial came on July 15th, when Adrianne's track teammate, Wendy Bartlett, took the stand. In David's sworn statement, he had said that while driving Adrianne home from a track meet in Lubbock, they stopped along the way and had sex. But Bartlett testified for the prosecution that it was she who drove Adrianne home from the track meet. On the same night, David claimed to have had sex with her.
And you're positive you drove her home on that particular evening after the cross-country meet in Lubbock?
Yes.
Adrianne Jones was portrayed, and human nature lets so many people believe that she was just a flighty 16-year-old, very attractive, who had indiscriminate sex one time and sort of deserved what she got. No one questioned whether that was true or not.
While Bartlett's testimony might have helped the prosecution preserve the image of Adrianne Jones, it raised a question the trial would never answer. If David did not have sex with Adrianne that night, then why did he say he did? And why did he commit the murder in the first place? Defense attorney Dan Cogdell was not about to clear up that mystery. He chose not to put his client on the stand.
I felt like our case could only get worse if David testified, because I thought the jury was predisposed not to believe anything he had to say if he testified.
Cogdell called only one witness, Diane Zamora, who pleaded the fifth.
She was brought into the courtroom while I was in there, and our eyes met, and you know, she was just stone-faced. She pled the fifth and left.
Mr. Williams,
On July 24th, after deliberating for over 8 hours, the jury reached a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant David Christopher Graham guilty of the offense of capital murder as alleged in the indictment.
I wasn't surprised. The worst part was just hearing my family behind me start crying and having to face them after it.
When I heard the guilty verdict, I felt so much pain come over to me from Mrs. Graham. She knew and I knew both that we'd all lost our children.
Cards with the law will have victim impact statements now.
Like Diane, David also received a life sentence. Cogdell immediately filed for an appeal and was candid about his disappointment.
Your client's reaction, sir?
How do you think my client react? He's spending 40 calendar years in a cage somewhere. He's not a real happy camper, neither am I. Any other good questions?
Indeed, there was one big question left hanging after Graham's murder trial. What was his motive? Before heading off to prison, the former cadet would only add to the mystery. Far from the mountains of Colorado Springs, David Graham now calls the George Bedo Unit Prison of Tennessee Colony, Texas, home. Several weeks before arriving there, Graham addressed the one mystery that had been generated by the trial. In an interview just after his conviction, David claimed that, in fact, he never did have sex with Adrianne Jones, making the motive for her murder all the more inscrutable.
In my statement, I said that I had had sex with Adrianne. I have recanted that statement, and what I said in that statement wasn't true. We were just casual acquaintances. I knew her from the team. I gave her a ride home occasionally. We never saw each other after school, called each other, anything like that.
Graham seems determined to deny the entire basis of his original confession and leave observers guessing.
I think all concerned wish that they knew why David Graham would go so far as to tell a lie. There is some thought that even if he had said that I'm just joking, it really didn't happen, that Diane Zamora by that point would not have believed him. And so he just kind of went along with it because he really believed in his mind that he would lose Diane Zamora.
When we spoke with him, instead of flying F-16s, 21-year-old Graham was spending his days exercising or going to church.
I've adjusted to prison life a lot better than most people would, I think. I guess prison life and the military life are a lot alike, but I think in the military you get a lot more respect from your superiors. In prison, I guess a lot of the guards don't, you know, they don't think you're worth much.
He lives in the medium security cell block where he says his walls are papered with pictures of airplanes. The one freedom David misses most is flying, something he likely will never do again.
The possibility that I might never fly again kind of scares me. It was something that I enjoyed so much. I still read a lot about it. I, collect photographs that my dad sends me of aircraft.
During his interview for this program, David seemed calmly resigned to his future behind bars and actually pointed out the bright side of his incarceration.
This situation got me away from Diane. That shouldn't, it doesn't justify anything, but at least I know in my life, my coming to prison and getting away from Diane was worth losing my dream over.
David says he is coping with his fate through prayer and has sought forgiveness for his role in the only crime he is willing to admit to, covering up Adrianne Jones's murder.
I feel that forgiveness is something that God gives to anyone as soon as they ask. And a lot of people, the Jones family, the prosecutors, a lot of the people that have heard about the case, whether or not I'm guilty, they don't want to forgive me. They think I should just suffer the rest of my life.
As for his relationship with Diane Zamora, after their convictions, the lovers who were once inseparable lost contact. And that's how David plans to keep it.
Today, when I think about Diane, I just wonder if there's anything I could do to help her. The last time I heard from her, she wrote me and said, you know, I still love you. I could tell just from her words it was the same old Diane.
Zamora, for her part, is an inmate at the Lane Murray Unit Prison in Gatesville. While she continues to study hard, trying to make the best of her situation, life behind bars has been a struggle.
Emotionally, Diane has built, as she sometimes does, a wall around herself. She has not made close friends with anyone down there. She stays to herself.
Linda Jones is grateful that justice prevailed so that she can put the pain of her daughter's murder behind her and live with her memories.
The memories I have of Adrianne are of her soccer and watching her play and knowing that she was going to do it. Watching her hair flip in the air, watching her with people.
At Mansfield High School, a tree was planted in Adrianne's memory. While Linda has done her best to move on, the one question that eats away at her is why. David Graham says he doesn't have an answer.
I really believe that Adrianne died for a reason. I don't know what it is. And I doubt if Linda Jones will ever figure it out. But a lot of lives have been changed because of this.
David says he would like to make his peace with Linda Jones and her family.
I've thought about writing to her. I'm not going to. If I could say anything to her, I'd just tell her that I love her and that I'm sorry for all she's gone through.
For Linda, contact with her daughter's killers is not even a possibility.
They're where they belong. Nothing they say will ever change what is a fact. And the one priority fact that remains is Adrianne Jones died by their hands, by their callous thinking on December 4th, 1995. And she's a box of ashes waiting to be buried. And that's all I got left of my baby.
Since this program first aired, David Graham has made a surprising turnabout from the story he told us. In November 2002, he admitted that he did in fact murder Adrianne Jones. Graham said he committed the crime to prove his, quote, ultimate devotion to his jealous girlfriend. As for Diane Zamora, in September 2005, she lost her bid for a new child. A judge ruled that the prosecution did not withhold crucial evidence. The evidence in question was two witnesses who were willing to say that Graham could have had sex with Jones as it was portrayed during the trial. For American Justice, I'm Bill Curtis. Out her bedroom window at night to meet friends, but Adrianne always returned before morning. Linda called Mansfield High, where her daughter was a sophomore. The school reported that Adrianne wasn't in class. Linda immediately reported Adrianne missing and gave her photograph to the Mansfield police.
And at noon, I knew something was really, really, really wrong. And I called my husband up and I said, Adrianne's not here. We can't find her anywhere. She's not at school. She's not at her friends. We called everybody in her address book looking for them. The Davids especially. I was looking at every David in her address book.
Earlier that morning, a farmer had discovered the body of a teenage girl in a field near Joe Pool Lake, a popular recreation area about 10 miles from Mansfield. The girl was wearing a sweatshirt, running shorts, and no shoes. She had been bludgeoned and shot twice in the head. Police from the neighboring town of Grand Prairie had jurisdiction over the area where the body was found. Mansfield, Texas, a sprawling bedroom community nestled between Dallas and Fort Worth. On the night of December 3rd, 1995, 16-year-old Adrianne Jones and her mother Linda had just returned home from working out at their health club when Adrianne received a phone call at around 10:30 p.m.
She walked down the hallway and she came back and I said, you get that phone put down and you get to bed, little girl. And then after that I went to bed. And she'd said it was David from cross country.
and he's upset.
Adrianne's mother had no idea who David was and assumed he was just one of her daughter's many high school friends. The next morning, Linda's son, Justin, woke her before leaving for school.
Justin knocked on my door and said, "Well, Mom, where's Adrianne?" I said, "What do you mean? She's at school." She says, "Well, her stuff's still here." And so that was around 7. So I went in and checked, and her things were still there. And I said, "What's going on?"
Linda knew her daughter would sometimes sneak
Back of her head. And you don't know why. What did this young 16-year-old little girl know or do that caused you to hate her that much?
11 days after Adrianne Jones was murdered, police in Grand Prairie, Texas, had a suspect in custody, a 17-year-old classmate named Brian McMillan. Although they had no real evidence against him, police held Brian for 3 weeks, pressuring him to confess to the murder. He never did, and after passing a polygraph test, he was released. His family later sued the city of Grand Prairie and the police and settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. For the next 9 months, detectives turned up no new leads. Their big break would occur far from Texas, at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. For 9 long months, detectives in Grand Prairie, Texas, focused on little else but solving the murder of 16-year-old Adrianne Jones. Graham was an honor student, active in the ROTC and Civil Air Patrol. He was expecting to hear any day about his appointment as a cadet at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Graham told police he hadn't spoken to Adrianne lately, but offered to help in any way he could. He gave detectives no indication of having any type of relationship with her. The case had detectives baffled. Adrianne was not a troublemaker or an outcast. She was an attractive, popular girl, a straight-A student who dreamed of studying behavioral sciences at Texas A&M University. She worked at a fast food restaurant after school, played soccer, and was on the track team. She had no enemies whom her family or friends could identify. It seemed like a random and senseless crime.
I mean, here she is, this beautiful young girl, and she's found in this really wackety place out in nowhere land, and she's been shot in the face and bludgeoned in the...
Detectives collected shell casings from the scene and determined that the girl had been shot with a 9mm pistol. The Tarrant County medical examiner saw no signs of sexual abuse and concluded that the teenager had died around 1 o'clock that morning. Early that evening, Grand Prairie detectives informed the Jones family that the body they had found was Adrianne's.
My husband had to go with the detectives and identify her body. And I called all my family, and I can still hear their voices saying, "No, you're wrong." And it was the truth. She had been shot and murdered by somebody. No one could figure out why.
Detectives interviewed several students at Mansfield High School, including a senior named David Graham, who, like Adrianne, was on the cross-country track team.